Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Davis, and I am the CEO and founder of D3 Digital Media. We are a company who employs decades of life science experience and innovative technology to develop and define digital marketing strategies for healthcare companies so that they can build their digital voice, increase awareness, and drive leads. Positioning themselves effectively in the competitive marketplace. So with that, just let me introduce our guest for today. Our guest is Jeremy Stackawitz. Jeremy is the CEO of Senzo. Jeremy will correct me here in a moment. And from 2009 to 2001, Mr. Stackawitz held roles of COO, President, and CEO at Quotient, helping to lead the company from startup to IPO. So with that, welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, Don. You got it. Senzo, and no worries. Little diagnostics company. We're hoping that more people will know our name going forward.
I'm looking at my notes and I'm going, okay, so I know the company name is in here, and yeah, all I had to do is look up at your picture and I would have seen it. So my apologies. Yeah. Yeah, I like the little device that Senzo has too. I mean, it's nice to see things, and so yeah. I mean, maybe just get us started off with a little bit about you, and tell listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we'll come back to Senzo in a moment.
Sure, sounds good. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Ended up getting an undergraduate biochemistry degree. Always loved science and business, even before I really understood what either of those meant, especially business. And always sort of imagined or hoped that I could work at something doing both of those. But I don't think I really knew what that even meant. I got my job coming out of college was as a healthcare consultant. And I don't think that I knew that there was a job called consulting until my senior year of college. So, but it was very nice to see that indeed a career marrying business and technology and science can exist. So yeah, I've been in healthcare for 25 years since then. Started on the consulting side, moved over to industry in pharmaceuticals for a couple of years, got an MBA in healthcare management, and went to Johnson & Johnson, again, started pharma biotech, did a bit of licensing acquisition at the corporate level and operating company level, business development, and then got to be involved in a really cool startup within J&J that married kind of device diagnostics, therapeutics, and ran that for a little while and handed that off to one of the therapeutic operating companies, and then ended up in diagnostics at Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. And again, did some licensing for new medical content. So just looking at areas and places and markers where perhaps therapeutics have actually outstripped diagnostics, which there are a lot of examples of that. That almost was unheard of. It was the problem was the other way for a long time, but we certainly have areas now where the outcomes of disease are actually limited by diagnostics, not by therapeutics. But so looked at new medical content at J&J, and then moved over and ran their transfusion medicine business within immunohematology. So I was in diagnostics, and I've stayed in diagnostics since then for 15 years. Moved over to a company called Quotient, Alba Bioscience in Edinburgh, Scotland. Great company that was doing a lot of great things in Scotland, and really they came out of the NHS, were privatized, and with the help of the existing team and lots of other people, joined as CEO and grew that company over a 10-year period into, I think we went from 30 people to 450 people, built brand new facilities in Scotland and Switzerland, started a full commercial organization from scratch in Europe and the US. And every possible way you could raise money, we raised money, begging, grants, venture capital, private equity, and then eventually went public, and then lots of deals after that. So a great experience on that side as well. But fully entrenched in diagnostics at that point. And about 2 years ago, middle of pandemic, it had been 12 years at Quotient, and it was just time for something else. I had always had a real interest and passion in point of care diagnostics. I'd never worked in point of care in my couple of experiences. And so came across Senzo. And Senzo is a brilliant little company founded by 3 PhDs, some great technology, great team, and they were looking for a CEO, and I was looking for something just like that. So that was 2 years ago almost, and happy to talk more about Senzo and technology. But I've kind of morphed from science business, sometimes on the deal side, sometimes on the commercial side, and moved from pharma biotech to diagnostics. And here we are. Senzo is based in London. I am based in Pennsylvania, the other side of the state from Pittsburgh, so just north of Philadelphia. And also keeping me somewhat busy is I have 4 children.
So, oh, nice. Yeah, yes. Really good. What ages?
Well, this is so 17, 15, 5, and 5 months.
Wow.
It's very interesting, wonderful, and strange phenomenon to have one about to leave for college and another one just arriving. So,
oh, believe me, I've seen it in my lifetime. My parents did the same exact thing. I was the youngest one, though. So,
great.
Yeah, it was really, really strange to grow up with 2 older sisters that essentially were, beyond college years whenever, I was still in grade school. So yeah, it was really interesting to watch that dynamic happen whenever I was a kid, and my parents would go to parent teacher conferences, and they would oftentimes be accused of my grandparents being my grandparents. So
yeah. I'm definitely going to have that happen if that's not already happening with the younger ones.
Yeah. So, you mentioned that Senzo's a point of care diagnostic. Can you talk a little bit more about, what specifically do you test for, and where are you currently at in the journey with Senzo?
Yeah. So fundamentally we're, point of care diagnostics. I think what's unique about us, in addition to some specific technologies, but our focus is non-molecular. So there are a lot of molecular diagnostics looking at the point of care setting, and all types of different technologies of speedier real-time PCR, LAMP, lots of amazing stuff that has already produced some amazing products. But we're doing it via kind of old-fashioned, old-school ELISA, but with some new techniques applied. So our real focus has been on immunoassay ELISA, but with ultra high sensitivity, and how do you deliver that ultra high sensitivity? And so I think, there's probably a lesson in here as well of, sometimes it takes a lot of good planning, and then sometimes it also takes just stroke of luck. And so our base technology is being applied to a platform we call the mobile analyzer platform. And that's what a lot of people think of when they think of point of care. So a toaster-sized box. Ours is microfluidic immunoassay based. So with a single sample, under 30-minute time to result, you can test for multiple analytes. It can be quantitative, qualitative, lots of different functions. And you would imagine that would be run by a professional user, but rather than the central labs where most of the outpatient testing occurs today, you're bringing that to a long-term care facility, a physician's office, a pharmacy, an urgent care, maybe even a triage in an emergency room, point of care at bedside within a hospital as well. So we're targeting that. As you might imagine, that is a fairly complicated project because you're developing hardware, software, multiple assays, multiplexing, quantitation. And so that's kind of the long arc. That product is still in development. We've shown proof of concept in a number of assays, but it's kind of moving towards regulatory bodies in the next 12 months, I would say. But what that spawned, and perhaps where more of our recent focus has been, is on a technology we call ALF, so amplified lateral flow. And this was literally born of smart scientists who wanted to, be creative and try their hand at something. And basically, in the middle of the pandemic in London, a couple of scientists looked around and said, "Wow, some of these lateral flow devices are terrible, performance-wise, especially the early ones in the UK." And so, hey, I wonder if we could do better. We have so much knowledge around amplifying ELISAs. That's kind of what a lateral flow is. Why don't we give it a shot? And that was June of 2021. Within 2 months, we had kind of feasibility. We were filing IP in August, and here we are 2 years later. And, we have finished product in packaging that can be tested by third parties. We're working on multiple targets. Our lead product, because of when it was discovered, is COVID. So a lot of that is a way for us to kind of showcase the technology. It's the furthest along, so we can use that to demonstrate the feasibility of the technology. But really what you get at the end of the day is all the good things you like about lateral flow. Easy to use, home testing as well as professional testing, inexpensive, fast time to result, less than 10 minutes, ease of use, no devices required, all those good things. The problem historically with lateral flow is they can't match the sensitivity, the accuracy of central lab testing. And so often they are used as a screen, but kind of a, yeah, maybe let's come have you talk to a doctor and take a real test. And the problem with that is the goal of this is to reduce patient healthcare provider interactions, reduce visits, reduce costs, reduce time. If all you're doing is adding a test on the front end, that's not doing any of that. And so the tests need to be decisive, FDA, UKSA, CE mark approved, and physicians need to buy into them. I think the good news that came out of COVID is the regulatory bodies are much more inclined to make all of this work and to approve at home and point of care because they've seen it work in a pandemic. I think healthcare providers, for the most part, absolutely see the benefit here. And the reality is most primary care docs don't want sick people coming to visit them anyway with respiratory virus. So, if you can take a test, scan a QR code, do a teledoc visit, and get a prescription in 20 minutes without having to leave your bed for very low cost, it benefits everyone. And so that's really the model we're trying to drive here. And I think, when you talk to someone and people are excited about it, they like the idea of the school nurse having tests. They like the idea of having a bunch of them in a drawer, and that if a kid wakes up on a Monday morning, you can do a test. And I think what they're saying, what we hear is, when are there going to be more of these? Right? Why don't we have a strep test? A respiratory virus test, or looking at more serious chronic diseases, more HIV tests, Hep C, sexual health, huge spikes in incidence and prevalence, at-home sexual health tests. People are embarrassed. They don't want to go in and get tested. This is a great answer to that. And I think a lot of people have expected, well, overnight, it felt like there were 20 COVID tests on the market. Some of those have to become tests for all these other things. And the reality is that is exactly the right thinking. Companies would absolutely love that, but the technology has to be good enough to pass muster when you're not in a pandemic.
Right.
Right. And for some of these diseases in particular, you can't have false positives or false negatives for HIV. So they have to be as good as central lab tests, and good is very, very, very good. And so it's just been a technology hurdle. I've always thought that the door was wide open for much more point of care testing and at home testing, but you have to have the technology. And that's, we can link that back to the company that shall not be mentioned, but that was the issue ultimately with them. They probably had the right idea. They just didn't have the technology to make it happen, and then pretended they did for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I don't even know that. I mean, I've read several of the briefs that kind of go through, a lot of information about Theranos, right. And kind of what they were working on. And It seems to me like, they worked a lot more on the aesthetics than they did on the actual functionality. So, um, and we all know that the easier part is the aesthetics. The harder part is, new skins on your device aren't that hard, but the harder part is getting your device to actually deliver the result that it was intended to. That's the hardest thing. And, obviously, the other thing is, oftentimes sample, with a lot of these tests, it's not, some small amount of sample that you need either to be able to produce a test. And that, again, seemed to be their downfall is, they started at a point of, hey, look, we're going to do everything with a drop. That's great. A drop of blood. In your case, though, it seems like, a lot of really great thinking going around, a lot of the places that the organization could wind up going as well. In terms of products that the people will see, short term, what does the market look like in terms of things that we will see sooner rather than later?
Yeah, the primary thing we're working right on the back of COVID is a respiratory triplex, quadplex that is COVID, flu, RSV. Because I think the reality is there's a big market for that. There's a big need for that. And while COVID incidence is much lower than it was, and hopefully will stay that way, there'll be some, and there's varying amounts of flu. And so I think a COVID test is useful, but if you're negative, you're like, I'm still sick. So now what? So I think that's very high on our list. Again, a triplex for 3 common sexual health diseases that all use the same sample. And that's maybe a point I didn't make, but one of the nice things about this technology is it seems to be very flexible to sample type. So we've mostly worked with nasal swabs, but we've also done proof of principle using urine for tuberculosis, finger prick whole blood for HIV. And so, while with a single drop of blood or nasal swab or whatever, you can't identify 50 things, or we can't identify 50 things, but with a given sample, you may be able to identify one really well, or 2 or 3 or 4 if we're multiplexing, and that has a lot of power and benefit to it as well. Another one that I think has a lot of utility, particularly with clinicians, is a quick differential test for a viral infection versus a bacterial infection. And so when you do show up at urgent care, right, and everyone goes, yeah, you got a fever, you've got an infection, we got to do a culture, we got to do a collection, and in a day I'll tell you whether it's viral or bacterial. And so they have 2 choices: either give you antibiotics, and then in a day you find out it was viral and you just contributed to the antibiotic resistance problem, or there's a doc who doesn't want to do that and doesn't give you anything, and they come back and go, oh yeah, it's bacteria, sorry you had to suffer for an extra day that I didn't give you antibiotics. And so a test that would tell you right away at least which of the 2 it is would make that decision a lot more accurate. So just little things like that aren't, as I mentioned before, I spent a couple years looking at new markers, and new markers are really exciting because you're finding ways to find lung cancer earlier, find chronic heart failure without having to do CT scans, things like that. It's really exciting. It's important. Companies that are doing that, that's great. It is a long haul. And I would argue, while sometimes the excitement level might not be as much around taking existing markers, in kind of number of people affected, it's probably more profound, and taking cost and time out of the system, but multiply that by however millions of people can use it. And so the markers are good. There's no issue generally. We don't look at anything where we go, well, the comparator isn't even good enough. The comparator is fine. The problem is the comparator takes 3 days and costs $200.
Right.
We'd like to give you a result in 10 minutes for $10. And that's kind of the value proposition, if you will, of convenience and overall cost reduction.
Or a lot of the world that I live in today is, hey, look, we can predict, 95% of stage 4 cancer. well, so can the patient. Most likely the patient's already feeling it at stage 4. So let's try and find stage 1 and stage 2 cancer at the same, sort of, levels. And, nobody in certain instances, nobody's doing that, in some of the areas that I currently deal with. And so, similar sort of thing, whenever you're sick, you want to know specifically why and dig into why. And it's really important, to have technology as close to you as possible as the patient as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and I think that's why delivery and accessibility is so important because, um, it's not exactly the same as having a diagnostic that finds, pancreatic at stage 2 versus 4, but think of like hepatitis C. Right? There's something like 1 million Americans that have hepatitis C that are undiagnosed, and there are great therapeutics, and every day they're not getting that therapeutic, they are damaging themselves.
Right.
And so, in a sense, it's the same, right? There is a diagnostic that will tell them early, but they're not getting it, they're not taking it. And so there needs to be a way to get that diagnostic to people. Tuberculosis, very different setting, but similar, right? There's problem around compliance and things like that. But for the most part, there are good therapeutics. The problem is diagnosis. And there are lots and lots of reasons for that, co-infection with HIV and all sorts of things. But, when you look at a disease that is still killing millions of people, finding a test that maybe, ultimately with working with Gates or WHO or something is, a 50-cent test that can be stacked in the back of a truck and, 100,000 of them brought to people that really need it. That's cool. Like that's that's why you get out of bed in the morning, right? Of like actually trying to see things like that come through that make real changes and real differences. And, those are, I think you're lucky if you get one of those in your career, but it's certainly worth striving for.
Absolutely. So in terms of Senzo, what are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing right now?
Yeah, I think we're essentially trying to do something that almost every big diagnostics company has a lateral flow platform, and if they didn't before COVID, they do now. And so that is a lot of people and a lot of dollars churning away. It's not that they don't see the attractiveness of these markets. So there are a lot of people trying to figure this out, and so um, we rightly so face a lot of skepticism of kind of sounds like a great story. We agree there's a market. We agree this would go great. We're not so sure you really figured it out though, right? And how did you figure it out? And giant company A, with 1,000 people working for 20 years haven't. And fill in the blank of that answer. But I think that's a challenge, is just technical skepticism. We're working our way through that, and in a lot of ways, I enjoy that challenge because that's what we have to do, right? We have to convince people, and whether that's investors or clinicians or regulatory bodies, or ultimately retailers and patients, that's always going to be part of the journey. But yeah, I mean, we have a big skepticism hurdle, but I think when you're inventing something that seems perhaps too good to be true, that's natural to happen. I'd be very, very specific here. I guess this is, sort of challenges and what concerns me. The current VC market, venture capital market, is not very good. And that has a lot of knock-on effects. And I think, private companies of all sizes are feeling the pain there. And as my VC friends would remind me, the VCs are feeling the pain also. But it's challenging, and it's there's not much you can do about it. Everyone knows there are peaks and troughs, and we're in a trough, and the thing that stinks is good companies with good ideas and good people are going to get wiped out here just because they can't access capital. And so
Right.
We're working hard to not have that happen with Senzo. And fortunately, we have some supportive, good investors, and we'll find our way. But it is challenging.
I would imagine it's nice too to have like the international reach as well. I mean, just knowing that you're an international company, that you have, to me, there's some people that just stay focused on their backyard and what they know instead of, understanding that we are an entire world, right? That deals with a lot of these same problems, and having people think about how do we get investment or apply for grants or, find funding somewhere to continue things on just seems to me like a better way to think about the problem at hand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Both in conversations we try to have on both sides of the Atlantic, and then I think partners or investors being open to, or maybe even savvy about the benefits of having a company like Senzo that has a bit of a footprint, small footprint in the U.S. and small footprint in the U.K. But there are definitely some advantages there.
Yeah. I mean, again, I think that this is just my biased opinion because I primarily delve into the world of, entrepreneurs, especially on the diagnostic and drug development side from a consulting perspective. And essentially my strong belief is that there are more dollars and more focused energy coming from a lot of the smaller companies versus the larger companies who are taking a portfolio and they're saying, look, I've got all these big automation lines and massive amounts of revenue that I have to keep up in terms of the diagnostic pipeline on this side. And then I've got this little tiny device that does point of care that delivers, these smaller amounts of tests. I can't believe that any one of the big guys essentially can focus nearly as much energy, on some of these problems as, some of the smaller companies that are out there, just because of the fact that your livelihood more or less determines the fact that your test has to be successful or the company won't survive. Right. So I believe in that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you have, and we could do, 3 podcasts just on the
Right.
advantages and disadvantages of little company, big company. I did 6 years at J&J, so I have some experience there. No, I think you're right. I mean, um, I will say resources help. So,
Mm,
that's always going to be a tick in their favor of just sometimes it's just throwing a lot of dollars and people at a problem. But, I think there are other advantages of creativity and people being rewarded for creativity and risk and all those sorts of things that are just harder to replicate in a
yep.
big company. But no, I think you're right. I think the other thing that ends up happening perhaps is, um, if you're one of the big entrenched players, I mean, point of care at the end of the day is going to take business away from central lab testing, right?
Sure.
So if you're playing in both sides, it's you're playing defense essentially then with your point of care portfolio because there's you can try to take share from the other guys and not yourself, and there's different ways to do that. But I don't think you're as hungry to drive point of care if that's your only business line, I guess
Yep.
is another way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So where do you see the biggest opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, specifically within diagnostics and point of care, I do think, VC environment aside, I think it has been, um, it, it's hard to say there's anything good about a pandemic that had devastating consequences. But the level of diagnostics certainly rose. Point of care diagnostics and at home diagnostics rose. And I think generally it landed with a favorable feeling towards them.
Mm,
And so I think people in general think about diagnostics more than they did before, which was zero
right.
usually. But it really is. It is the tip of the spear in healthcare. I mean, it is for the most part. Whether it's IVD diagnostics, imaging, X-ray, whatever you think about it, it is for anything at all complicated. It is the first thing you have to go through before anything else happens in the health system, and it's pretty important, and it's important to get it right, and I think it's important to make it better, especially how accessible it is. So I think, as I said, I think the FDA has come around more to that, but I just think people see it as and it's part of a broader movement, right, of people want to have more control over their health, knowledge about their health, effect over their health, access to their health, and I think this fits into all of that. So I think the opportunity is, you know, this is going to happen. It's just going to be limited by technology development, allowing it to happen. And then, winners and losers, right? But like in 5 years, you're going to go, like, people are not going to think it's weird to go to Walmart for your doctor's appointment and to shop for 20 minutes while you wait to get your lab results. And then you get a prescription and you're done. Right. And so that is the way this is moving. It's just whose instruments and whose tests are they going to be using to do all that, and then can some of that be done at home as well?
Right. In terms of the leadership advice that you've gotten in your lifetime, what is some of the best leadership advice that you've ever obtained?
Yeah, I'm stealing this one from a quote, and I actually pulled it off my wall because I had it up behind me, but just so I can read it. But I've always thought it was pretty profound. But it's from a famous person, so it wasn't given to me directly. But it's a Colin Powell quote, and it's leadership is solving problems. The day soldiers stop bringing you their problems is the day you have stopped leading them. And this is the part that always resonated with me. They've either lost confidence that you can help or concluded that you don't care. Either case is a failure of leadership. And that, it just resonates with me. We've all found those situations where you're like, I've lost the group, and yep, this is probably why, because they know that, they know someone else is calling the shots, so I can't really help them, or they told me 3 times and I didn't listen, and this is what I get. And so it's always been a good reminder of what to strive to do. And then also sometimes it helps you piece together when something goes wrong, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, listening is so key, and as well as reacting, right? I mean, it's kind of both, and so many people play this placation game where they try and sort of put off the decisions that should be made in the organization instead of actually executing on them. And I think that quote really deals with a lot of that as well.
Right, and it's in that sense, it's probably very military oriented in that you're biased towards action, and like if you didn't do something, it's because you can't or you won't, and so I'm not going to try anymore.
Right, absolutely. So there are 3 questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
What inspires me? Yeah, my maybe coming full circle to my intro, but I'm going to say my kids, and I think they inspire me, they teach me. They would probably say they train me, but in a lot of different ways, right? They inspire you in kind of who you are as a person, how you act, but in a less serious way. Like, I like doing things in my professional career that my kids would be proud of, but then sometimes every once in a while you do something that they think is cool, and that's even better, right? See the new packaging of our test, or oh, you got to go to do this and do that. And I think in a way that's like good motivation, right? Is I think chasing money or fame or glory or whatever has pitfalls, but in some ways, try to impress your teenager, and that's that's a hard task, and perhaps a good goal. So, but I was also thinking on the other end of the spectrum, they, I'll take my 5-year-old, right? Patience, right? It teaches me patience. It teaches me compromise, teamwork, all these things that can be applied for real in a professional setting. And then some of it's more abstract, just the way, kids aren't cynical yet. And they look at things sometimes in a simple way, but it's the right way, and so do we make things too complicated sometimes? And can you just look at something a little bit more simplified, or, without preconceived biases, all those good things that kind of kids are free of. Or I see it sometimes, and it sort of makes me think I should do more of that, right? So
Absolutely.
it's I guess it's a combination of kind of inspire and help ground and see what might be useful to apply in a professional setting.
Yeah, absolutely. What concerns you?
Yeah, I mentioned acutely and very specific to Senzo and our situation, the VC market. The other thing that is very specific to us, but I do not think Europe has done a great job at rolling out and implementing IVDR, which is the new regulatory regulations governing diagnostics. I have no problem, and I don't think most little companies have a problem with the regulations themselves. The problem is there are no notified bodies that will take on small new companies. And so I think Europe is going to find themselves after a year or two or three of this, that they have seriously stifled innovation and getting, I mean, what we're going to see is the opposite of the last 30 years, which is products are going to come through the FDA into the US before Europe, which is amazing to think about, but that's kind of where we are. Yeah, I mean, I think those two are very specific to our situation, but I'm sure other people, other small companies in diagnostics can relate to both of those.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks for sharing those two. And then last question, what excites you?
Yeah, I think, and maybe this goes back to my spark when I was a kid of the science and business, but I still love um, seeing an idea through all the way to like a tangible outcome, and whether that's an idea that goes through R&D and is approved, and then at Quotient we conceived of products that ended up being used in 8,000 labs across the world that had just had our trade dress on them, and you could say, man, our company's product is everywhere, and there's something that feels really good about that. And I think, as you hear about a cool new idea, or you see one of your ideas that was an idea 2 years ago working its way through the process, that still excites me. And to think that it might be on the market and, change lives and bend how healthcare is applied. Yeah, that's, again, another reason to get out of bed and do this thing, because it doesn't happen all the time. And so when it happens, it feels good, and it really is exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy, for coming to the Life Science Success podcast and telling us about Senzo and all the great work that you're doing. And just thanks a lot for being here. I really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure, Don. And, happy to do it anytime. Keep up the great work, and good luck.
Thank you.